Welcome, Professor Singer. Good morning there in Australia. Professor Singer, welcome.
Comienza, David.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you on behalf of the Suyung Order of Latin America Chan Zen Buddhism. Our purpose is to publicize the Buddha's proposal as a school of thought based on the study of the foundational folios and records, always on board of a non-dogmatic, non-religious mind with the strong development of a critical thinking system. The reason that brings us together today is the talk, Ethics for All Sentient Beings, given by one of the most influential philosophers of today, Mr. Peter Singer. I think he doesn't need a presentation, but let me tell you something about him. Professor Singer is a professor of bioethics with a background in philosophy. He works mostly in practical ethics and is best known for animal liberation, effective altruism, and for his writing about global poverty. He has recently published two great books, Why Vegan and The Life You Can Save. Both you can find them on Amazon with no problem. I leave you in the company of Professor Peter Singer. Welcome, Professor. Good day there. How are you?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very happy to have this chance to speak to you. I'm going to speak for perhaps something like 20 minutes, not more, and then I want us to have some discussion. You can ask questions or you can make comments, because I'm very interested in hearing your perspectives on what I will be talking about. All right, so why ethics for all sentient beings? The fundamental ethical view that I hold is that the right thing to do is the thing that has the best consequences. That means the best consequences for everyone, not only for oneself, and not only for people living now, but also it's important to think about people who will come after us, living in the future, and not only for human beings, but for all beings for whom lives can go well or badly. And so I need to explain a little bit about that, and also then about what we mean by the best consequences. I think that it is better that the life of any being whose life can go well or badly should go well, and that it should not go badly. And what I understand by a being whose life can go well or badly is a being with an internal perspective on their life. Another way of putting that would be by saying a being who has subjective experiences, is the subject of consciousness. We could think of that by saying, is there something that it is like to be that being? So there is something that it is like to be me. I'm having certain experiences now, and there's something that it's like to be all of you. But there is also something that it is like to be a dog or a cat or a pig or a chicken or a chimpanzee or a whale. I believe that all of these are sentient beings, and there is something that it is like to be them. And we are perhaps most aware of that when something is going badly for them. When we see an animal suffering, we can immediately relate to that suffering. We can understand that something is going on in that being that is similar to our own suffering, not necessarily identical, but in important respects similar, or similar to the suffering perhaps of a very young human child who can't articulate that suffering, can't describe it to us, but we can know when children are suffering as well. Now, for most of Western civilization, the sphere of ethics has been limited to human beings. So this, I think, does make a contrast between Western civilization and that of much of Eastern thought, and Buddhist thought is obviously an example of that, in that the Christian tradition in particular really didn't count non-human animals. There's some discussion of that among early Christian thinkers like St. Paul, who said, does God care for oxen? And that was like a rhetorical question. Basically, his answer was no. He was talking about Jewish laws about not working your ox on the Sabbath. And he suggested that that law was intended for the benefit of humans. And that was then followed by Augustine and by Thomas Aquinas, all of whom explicitly denied that we have duties to non-human animals. They said we only have duties to beings who have an immortal soul, and they denied that animals have immortal souls. Only human beings were made in the image of God and have immortal souls. And I think that's been a very harmful effect in the Western tradition that has led many Western people, and of course, because the influence of Western thought has spread elsewhere in the world, people outside the West as well, to think that animals are not important or that they don't count. Whereas I think that pain is pain, no matter what the being who can suffer that pain. And just as we would, I hope everybody here would think that it's quite wrong to say the pain of a person of another race does not matter as much as the pain of a person of my race. We would see that as racism. Or the pain of a woman does not matter as much as the pain of a man, which we would see as sexism. But I think we should also see the view that the pain of a non-human animal does not matter as much as the pain of a human as something similar. And I use the term speciesism to indicate the parallels between the prejudices of racism, sexism, and the prejudice against beings who are not members of our species. So I think in that respect, it's something in which Buddhism was much more enlightened than Western thinking in talking about the importance of compassion for all sentient beings. But I have to say, I do regret that in many countries that describe themselves as Buddhist, this is not observed really to any greater extent than it is in Western countries. So I've traveled in a number of Buddhist countries where there was still cruelty to animals, where people were not generally vegetarian, and this seems to me to be really not in keeping with the teachings of Buddha and the Buddhist tradition. So that's one important point when I talk about ethics and the spread of ethics, is that it includes all beings capable of suffering or feeling pain or pleasure, and we should give similar consideration to their interests where they are similar interests to our own interests as we give to those of humans, which is not to say that the interests always are similar, but where they are, where we can compare them, I think we should give similar weight. I'm happy to discuss that in more depth in the question time and discussion if you have further questions about that. But I also think that we have many failings in regard to the way in which we apply our ideas about ethics with regard to human beings as well. And here we have we often say that we believe that all human lives are of equal worth, or all human lives are equal value. But in fact, in many important areas, we do not act in accordance with that. So I'd like to mention that in terms of two areas that I've been active in myself, in addition to my concerns about the treatment of animals. One of them is relating to people in extreme poverty in poorer parts of the world, in low-income countries, where if we really believed in the equality of human beings, it's hard to believe, I think, that affluent people would continue to live their comfortable lives without doing anything, or without doing very much for people in extreme poverty, in need. And yet that is the situation in the world today. That is, we know that the world is divided between rich countries and poor countries, and of course some middle-income countries. But there are some countries with a lot of extreme poverty where, for example, people die from preventable diseases. They might die from malaria, or they might die from diarrhea because they don't have much sanitation and they don't have the very simple treatment to deal with diarrhea, or they may die from a range of other diseases which we know how to prevent. And in fact, today, right now, as we're talking, a similar situation is unfolding, where the wealthier nations are buying up supplies of the available vaccines for COVID-19, and the low-income countries are getting very little of this. The Secretary of the World Health Organization said just yesterday that it's scandalous how few vaccines are being provided to some of the poorest countries in the world, although they also have COVID outbreaks. So if we really regarded all human beings as equal, we would not have a situation where people in wealthy countries can have the most complicated medical treatments so that they can survive, sometimes costing millions of dollars if they have to spend time in intensive care units in hospitals in wealthy countries. Whereas in the low-income countries, people die because, for example, they do not have a bed net to protect them against malaria. And a bed net may cost about $2 to protect them against malaria. You can add a little bit to that amount for the costs of distributing the bed nets, getting them out to the villages, educating people in how to use them, but the costs are still very low. And it's certainly possible to save lives in low-income countries for hundreds of dollars or for $2,000 or $3,000, not for millions of dollars. So we have an extremely unequal world in which people are looking after themselves and people like them and not really being concerned for others. And I've urged that those of us who are comfortably off, those of us who have more than enough to live on and to be secure for our future needs, do have an obligation to help people in extreme poverty where we can effectively do so. And in accordance with that, I set up an organization called The Life You Can Save. You can find it online at thelifeyoucansave.org. And it recommends independently assessed nonprofits or charities who are helping people in extreme poverty, so that if you donate to one of these organizations, you can have confidence that your money will be well used and will do the most amount of good that it possibly could. So that's the second area where I think we are neglecting to think ethically about others. And the third area, it relates to the future. So what I've said so far is we don't really count the sufferings of non-humans, and we don't really fully count the sufferings of humans who are far from us, who are living in low-income countries and a different kind of lifestyle from us. And now I want to say we don't really count the well-being of people who are not yet alive, but will be alive in the future. And the clearest way in which we discount that well-being is in our failure to take account of what we are doing to the climate of our planet. So we know now, I think, beyond reasonable doubt, that greenhouse gas emissions, both fossil fuel emissions and emissions from animals, from livestock, such as particularly beef and sheep, is emitting greenhouse gases that are warming the planet. We also know that the most serious effects of this warming will be on people in low-income countries, partly because they live in countries that are already hot, and partly because many of them are dependent on rainfall to grow their crops so that their families can eat, and but also because they don't have the resources to protect themselves and defend themselves against a changing climate in the way that people where I am now, I'm speaking to you from Australia. It's also a country that is hot, or much of it is hot. It's also going to be affected by climate change. We had terrible bushfires just over a year ago here, undoubtedly the result of climate change. But despite all that, despite those bad things, we are a wealthy country and people can continue to live and survive. That is not in danger. But in some of the low-income countries, it will be. People will be unable to grow crops on the land where they used to. It will get too hot, and they will become refugees. They will perhaps try to go to the cities and find work, but they may not. And I think it's pretty clear that the situation is going to be very bad for them, increasingly bad, if we do not drastically curtail our greenhouse gas emissions. But at the moment, we have not been doing nearly enough in that respect. I'm very glad that tomorrow the Trump presidency will be over and President Biden will be able to have stronger policies on climate change, as he's promised to do. That will help, but I'm still somewhat doubtful that it will be enough. And of course, other countries worldwide have to join in as well. So that's the third area in which I think we are not really acting ethically with regard to a category of sentient beings, in this case, humans and living in the future, but also non-human animals. So let me draw this together by asking the question, so what would it be to live a truly ethical life in the 21st century? And if I go back to what I said about the treatment of animals, I think that a truly ethical life requires boycotting commercial animal production. Commercial livestock production is profit-driven. It's not driven by concern for the welfare of animals. There may be some small individual farmers who do care about the welfare of their animals, but by and large, they have been put out of business by the big industrial factory farms that confine tens of thousands of animals indoors in sheds and are able to produce their meat or eggs or milk more cheaply. And it's very hard for small, more ethical farmers to survive and make a living. So I think that's a major reason why we should be following a vegetarian diet, or for those who can do it, even a vegan diet without animal products at all. But that also relates to the third point that I was talking about, that is climate change, because we know that the animal production industry is a major contributor to climate change. So both for the sake of climate and for the sake of the animals, I think an ethical way of living avoids animal products as far as that is reasonable in anyone's individual circumstances. Of course, for people who can't get enough to eat or can't get a healthy diet without doing that, it's a different question. But for people who are able to walk into a supermarket and buy food that will nourish them and their family in a healthy way without eating meat, I think that's the right thing to do. I also think that, as I said, for those of us with the means to support ourselves and our families comfortably, making a contribution to helping people in extreme poverty is part of living an ethical life. And finally, on the question of climate change, while we should certainly try to personally reduce greenhouse gas emissions as far as we can, it's particularly important in this area that we be active citizens and that we try to campaign for our government to act for the benefit of the future, citizens in our own country, of course, as well, but for the benefit of everybody in the world in the future. Because I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think we're going to sufficiently reduce our greenhouse gases emissions simply by the proportion of the population who is prepared to act ethically doing the right thing. I think we need measures like carbon taxes or other schemes to put a price on emissions which encourages people to find alternatives to fossil fuel use and find alternatives to meat consumption as well. So be a vegetarian or vegan, donate to the most effective charities helping the poor you can find, and be an active citizen pressuring your government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your country, and for your country to play its part in global negotiations to try to slow and mitigate climate change to the greatest extent possible. Thank you very much for your time. I think we've gone about 20 minutes. And as I said, I really am keen to hear from you and to know what you think about these issues and to enter into a discussion with that. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Singer. We really appreciate the time that you have dedicated to us in these 20 and more minutes. Thank you very much. Let's start with some questions. Master Xiang, you can talk. Maestro Xiang, si quieres, puedes hablar.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. The arbiter. My English is very basic. Excuse me for my English. Very short words. You are my ethic hero many years ago. It's very important for me, see you, because when I read your books, my life is different. Excuse me for my English.
No, your English is fine. I wish I could speak to you in Spanish, but I'm sorry, I can't. Thank you for using English.
And this is my tattoo.
Yes, you mentioned.
My tattoo with your phrase in Ethic Practic. En Spanish, el principio fundamental de igualdad es el principio de igual consideración de intereses. This is my personal mantra for my life.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And I know that you are living your life in a way that brings more people to live ethically and to think about ethics. And I greatly appreciate that.
Professor Singer, we have another question. How can we build altruistic thinking in our life and with all the people that live around us?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's a lot of people asking that question. How can we persuade people to be more altruistic, get them to think about it? There are some colleagues of mine working not in philosophy, but in psychology, who are trying to carry out studies to do this. So I think at an individual level, we do best to set an example. Of course, we can talk to people, but I find many people do not react well if you try to tell them what to do without their invitation. They see that as preaching or something self-righteous, and they don't like it. I myself was made to think about animals and became a vegetarian simply because I had lunch with somebody who was a vegetarian. This was now actually 50 years ago. I was a graduate student in Oxford in 1970. You know, I noticed that he was a vegetarian because he asked if there was meat in a dish that was being served. And when he was told there was meat, he refused it. And in 1970, it was very unusual to meet vegetarians. There were far fewer than there are now. So I asked him what his problem with meat was. He didn't sort of, you know, try to tell me at the start that I should not be eating meat, because I was eating meat. I'd taken the meat dish that he refused. But he set an example that led me to ask him why he didn't eat meat, and then he explained it. So I think that's very often an effective approach, as it was in my case. Just be humble about what you're doing, but don't be afraid to show it. Don't be afraid for other people to know about it, and then they may ask you. So I think that works well with being a vegetarian, because eating is something we do with other people very often, with friends and sometimes with strangers. In terms of donating to charity, perhaps that's a less public act, and some people say you shouldn't talk about your charitable giving. But here the research shows that if people know that others are helping, they are more likely to help themselves. So I therefore do encourage people to let it be known in some way that they are supporting some effective charities, that they are living in that way. And I think that does encourage other people to join. Again, you have to be modest about it. You can't be too preachy, but you can talk to others about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So I think as individuals, that's the best we can do. But you know, I am always trying to work on a larger scale as well. That's why I founded the organization, The Life You Can Save. It's an online organization that is encouraging people to donate to the most effective charities. It's been going about 8 years now, 8 to 9 years. And so far, we have a website where people can donate to the charities through our website. We don't take any of the money from it. All 100% of the money goes to the charity, but we then get a record of what's been donated. And in those 8 years, about $35 million have been donated to effective charities. So, you know, that's good, but it's still very small as a part of all of the charitable giving in the United States alone. So we would like to spread that, and we are talking to other people who have influence and who have a lot of contacts to try to spread that message as well. That's a way of trying to persuade more people to live ethically on a larger scale. And it's also important, of course, to try to build a community feeling, some community networks between people that they can feel supported by each other and help each other. And I think that's also a way of building ethics locally, and then maybe it can branch out to these other issues that I've been talking about.
Thank you, Professor. Another question, Bernardo, adelante, por favor.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. How are you, Peter? I guess it's January 20th already in Australia.
That's right.
Yeah. So I couldn't hear all what you said because I was working, so I get late here. But not exactly or specifically about veganism or animal life. my question goes into ethics, maybe in a wider way, and it's having on account the situation we have in a country like Colombia, which is pretty hard in a lot of senses, and having on account something that one Colombian writer says, and I agree with that, is that you cannot ask somebody to be concerned about reading when they are concerned about eating. Um, they cannot fulfill their basic needs, so it's kind of hard to ask them to be concerned of this kind of topics like ethics. And definitely ethics like logical thinking depends on learning. You don't develop that from nothing. You have to learn. You need somebody to help you on that, and it requires time and effort. um Regarding this, and having a account your experience, and that you're an authority on this topic, what could you advise for us to help us approaching all these people that definitely does not have these basic needs fulfilled, and they're not thinking on these problems we have? Maybe the I would say privilege, as it is not, but I don't find another word to think on and to try to work on.
Yes, that's certainly a situation that is very different from that in countries like Australia, where I am, or in the United States, where I spend a lot of time as well. So I think it is important in countries that have significant numbers of people who may not get enough to eat, or may have difficulty in meeting the basic needs of their family, to try to produce a social security system, a social welfare net that can cover those most urgent needs. I think that that's important as countries progress. Countries that have significant inequality of wealth, that people who are living at the upper income levels of those societies are prepared to support a system of welfare that taxes them at a higher rate than others, and that revenue then goes to support people in extreme poverty, to make sure that everyone has the basics, and the basics include food, shelter, and at least a basic standard of medical care, of health care. And so I would encourage you, I did talk about being active citizens for climate change, but I would encourage you, in the light of the problem that you have just raised, to also be active citizens for a fairer and more just society. Because as I understand the situation in Colombia, probably the country does produce enough to feed everybody if there were better systems of ensuring that people at the lowest level could get those basic minimums that I think everybody is entitled to.
Thank you very much. Juan Esquivel, por favor.
Good morning, Professor Singer. First of all, I would like to thank you for your fantastic job in many areas that are not only related to philosophy, but also many other areas of human life, such as laws. My question is related to one specific topic that usually it's probably well known in the East, as you mentioned earlier, but it might not be as convincing or persuasive to Western civilization, and that is, how can we approach the importance of all sentient lives, in animal life specifically, when there is a lot of issues that are directed by the political agenda of a specific country. For instance, the previous person talked about how in Colombia is a really tough country or harsh country in regards to these topics, because there's a lot of people that, although they may be concerned about the fact that animals may be having a bad time, they usually don't have like the resources to actually play an active part in the process of understanding that we are not the only sentient beings that need to be aware of the importance of ethics. So how would you approach this issue in Western civilization, where there is a lot of topics that usually get in the way to actually play an active part in this process?
Yes, I accept that when people don't know where their next meal is coming from, they're not going to be very interested in the ethics of how we treat animals. And that's one reason why I think it is important for all societies to provide that security of meeting basic needs as far as they can possibly do so. But people in poverty tend not to eat nearly as much meat as affluent people anyway. More likely to eat, I suppose, in Colombia, they may eat rice and beans or something of that sort as staples rather than a lot of meat. And they have a lower impact on the climate as well because of their lifestyle. They're not flying off to other countries or driving big cars. So to some extent, you could say they're doing less harm. They may not be doing a great deal of good, except in terms of feeding themselves and their families, but they may be doing less harm to the planet as a whole. So I would not place great ethical burdens on people who are in poverty and are, don't have the security that other people do. But I would certainly try to encourage them insofar as that's possible to think about others. And in fact, communities of poorer people often do think about others, at least within their own community, because that's a support network that they have. And certainly statistics in the United States show that poorer people tend to give a higher percentage of their income to charities than middle income people. So if you look at of course, they're giving fewer dollars, but they're giving a higher percentage. If you look at a graph of what percentage do people at certain incomes, from low incomes to high incomes, what percentage of their income do they donate to charity? The graph is the shape of a U. It starts off as quite a high percentage for poor people, then it drops for the middle income people, and even reasonably upper middle income. And then when people get very wealthy, then they give a higher percentage as well, because they realize that they have more money than they know what to do with, and they want some purpose in life other than earning money. But people in real poverty, I think, do have a sense of helping others, and hopefully that can be preserved so that when they have the opportunities to help others, they can do so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Singer. We know that your time is limited. We want to know if you have more time for a few questions, or you tell us.
I could take a few more questions. Yes, maybe let's go
Okay.
another five minutes to see how it goes.
One from the chat. The three characteristics of an ethic individual: be vegetarian, be altruistic, and take active position to preserve the government, could be taken as a moral standard. Will there be other ways to be ethic without doing those three things?
So, look, morality is large and complicated, and in my 20-minute presentation, I could not cover every aspect of morality. I wanted to focus on three things that seem to me to be both extremely important and often neglected. So that's why I picked those three things. But yes, of course, the way you live in your relations with your family and your friends, that is also relates to ethics. The way you conduct yourself in business has an ethical component too. And if you're a professional, a healthcare professional, or a lawyer, then there are also ethical standards that you should be following. So, so ethics is very wide-ranging. But I did want to mention three important aspects of it that, as I say, are often neglected.
Thank you. Now, one from the audience. Santiago, please.
Okay.
Adelante, Santiago.
Okay, I will try to ask the question for me, Mr. Singer.
Yes.
Good evening, Professor. First of all, I want to appreciate your work. It's very inspiring, and I have seen how Animals Australia works, as well as the Life You Can Save works. So I wanted to ask you something. I have seen a talk. I don't remember if it was you or if it was someone from the Life You Can Save. He's talking about organizations that are reliable in order to, if we can do an economic support, so we can trust. Do you know if some organizations in Latin America that are reliable, because you know that the corruption here is very high, so it's difficult to trust in an organization that works for a better purpose, but a good way that, for some of us that don't work actively in an organization, but with a short economic support, we can make a big change, a little change. So the question is that you know some organizations in Latin America that are reliable to do so?
That's a very good question. I wish I could give you an answer off the top of my head, but I don't know which of the organizations that we have assessed do work in Latin America, or distinctively Latin American organizations. You could perhaps email the Life You Can Save. If you email info, info @thelifeyoucansave.org, and ask them that question and try and get an answer. And if you don't get an answer, you're welcome to email me. I'm Singer P, Singer, P for Peter, @gmail.com, and I will try to find out the answer for you, because that's a very good question.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Sandra, adelante.
Cállese, por favor, cállese. Ay, sorry, porque no me sale. Okay. Hello. Thank you very much, Mr. Singer, for being here, for having taken the time to be with us, because I think you have a very busy agenda. So we are very pleased to have you here. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
My question is this. Well, it has two parts. I would like to know what's your opinion about the situation. You already told us what you thought and what we could do in order to improve the situation. But I would like to know if you are optimistic or rather pessimistic about the things that human beings will be able to do in order to stop climate change. One, that's one part of the question. And another one is the rich countries are the ones that consume the most. And this society that is so consumerist is also causing the destruction of the planet. Do you really think that we will be able, or that the world will be able to stop all that, to get to a point where they stop and they think, okay, we are destroying the planet, we have to change our habits, we have to change our behavior, and that will really have a positive impact on the planet and on the situation? That's
yes, they're both good questions. So, am I optimistic about climate change and about what do I think about whether Western consumer societies will change the way they live? And in a way, those two questions, of course, are tied up together. I'm not very optimistic about doing enough to reduce climate change. As I said, it's definitely a positive that we are having President Trump replaced by President Biden. And I hope that the US will then again return to international agreements like the Paris Agreement and will start to resume the leadership role that it should be playing, because that's what we need. But I can't see into the future, so I can't really tell you whether enough is going to be done. In terms of consumer societies changing their lifestyle, I think what's perhaps more likely is that consumer societies will develop technologies that enable them to continue with something close to their present lifestyle with less damage. So, particularly when we talk about the consumption of electricity, which has been extremely damaging when that electricity was generated by burning coal or oil, or even natural gas, which is somewhat less damaging, but still damaging. But we are now reducing the price of solar electricity so that it's really fallen below the cost of coal. Although, of course, we have these billions of dollars invested in coal power stations, so they may continue for some time. But eventually, I am reasonably optimistic that solar and other renewable forms of energy will replace fossil fuel, and that's going to be a big change. But whether that will go far enough, I've talked about meat from both climate and the perspective of animals. We're also trying to produce plant-based products that taste and feel like meat when you eat them, and we're even producing meat from a cellular level. So just maybe this month actually, or late last month, in Singapore for the first time, a government approved chicken cells that were never part of an animal, were just grown from cells in a factory. And that's not yet competitive in price. It's kind of a novelty at the moment. It doesn't compete in price with chicken, but I hope that it soon will. And maybe then a lot more people will shift to products that don't come from living animals because they are safer in terms of diseases. They are equally economical or more economical, and they taste just like the products that they're used to. So insofar as I have some optimism, and I'm not confident about this, but I think we can be hopeful, it's more that I look to technology, perhaps guided by a marketplace of people who, maybe a minority of people, but enough people who are concerned about the environmental impact of what they're consuming and the impact on other sentient beings.
Okay,
I think we could maybe take one more question if we have one, and then I think I do need to go.
Okay, the last question, Gabriel.
Okay, good night. Good night, Professor. I had made one question before.
Sure.
This question is, which are the strategies you apply to convince or to make people engage with your ethical proposal? Because we do be vegetarian or be altruistic could be good, but it could not make changes around the world. So what are the strategies you apply to convince others, to make others apply these standards, these moral standards?
Well, I can only use the strategies that I have available to me. I'm not the head of any government. I'm only a philosopher with the ability to speak and to write. And so those are the strategies that I use to try to persuade people that this is the right way to live. And to some extent, one thing that I haven't mentioned, but I think that is part of any Buddhist approach to ethics, is that there is also internal rewards, that living an ethical life is internally fulfilling and rewarding. And there is good psychological research showing that. So in the book, The Life You Can Save, for example, I refer to that as well. But, you know, insofar as I come across people in government in positions of power, I try to influence them to do more. When I come across people of greater influence, let's say sports stars who may have millions of followers, I try to influence them to think about their ethical impact on the world. That's really the only strategy that I have available to me.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Singer. We only have words of thanks. We really appreciate your time, your effort, not only with us. You really are making an effort to change the world. And we really appreciate it, not only for us, for our children's or grandchildren's and all the humanity, all human and sentient beings. I really think we all are thanks with you. Thank you very much for your time and for this lovely hour that you have bring to us tonight for us and today for you. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to talk to you all, and good luck with all of your activities. And I wish you all well, and I hope that the message can spread to everyone. And do visit thelifeyoucansave.org, by the way, if you want to download a free copy of my book, The Life You Can Save, either an audio book or an ebook. It's available on that website. So I hope you'll be able to read more from that. Thanks. Good. Well,
thank you.
Good afternoon to you. And I'll say goodbye.
Good evening. Thank you.
Goodbye, Professor Singer. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Nice day.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos por haber dedicado esta hora a esta maravillosa charla del profesor Singer. En nombre de la Orden Suyun del Budismo Chan Zen Latinoamérica, les agradecemos a quienes asistieron y normalmente asisten a este tipo de espacios que muy amablemente nos brindan conferencistas de esta talla. Hoy es nuestro primer conferencista de talla mundial. Vamos a continuar con este tipo de actividades con conferencistas de igual magnitud, y adicional a ello los invitamos este sábado a las 7 de la noche por este mismo link de conexión a nuestra charla de salón abierto que vamos a tener. Maestro, no sé si quieras decir alguna otra cosa.
Sí, es que el jueves hay una charla que nos va a dar sobre el tema de los procesos cognitivos y cómo influyen en nuestro sufrimiento o no sufrimiento, el maestro Cristian. Ahora se me cruzaron los cables, creo que es mañana a las 8 de la noche.
Sí, jueves sería mañana, maestro.
O sea,
no, pasado mañana.
Mañana a las 8 de la noche.
Pasado mañana, maestro, jueves 21.
de la noche. Sí, o sea, esa se está haciendo entre semana porque pues él por motivos de trabajo no puede los sábados. Los invito a todos a que estemos pasado mañana, que estemos pendientes de esa charla, porque realmente él maneja el tema muy, muy bien y seguramente nos va a poder retroalimentar mucho con la manera en la que él maneja el tema, porque lo entiende muy bien. Eso era todo y pues las gracias a todos por estar acá.
A través de nuestras redes sociales nos pueden seguir y estar informados de todas las actividades que la Orden viene realizando y va a realizar durante el año. Entonces, por favor, conéctense con nosotros. Facebook, página de internet,
Instagram,
Orden Suyun del Budismo Chan Zen Latinoamérica. Bueno, feliz
Roberto.
a mi Tofu, gracias.
Santiago, adelante.
Gracias.
Chao, Alejandra.
Roberto, quisiera preguntar algo. Quisiera preguntar algo y es, ¿en qué sitio de YouTube podremos ver luego la charla de él con traducción e incluso
Santiago,
la charla de los últimos sábados? ¿Dónde podremos ver, dónde las podemos ver que no las he ubicado, si de pronto es en el YouTube, en el canal de YouTube de Mente en Orden o es en el de La Orden?
Santiago, la charla es en el canal de YouTube que estamos manejando, que es el de Mente en Orden. En el de Mente en Orden, inmediatamente tengamos la traducción, la subimos al canal y la compartimos por todas nuestras redes sociales. Y lo propio será con los encuentros anteriores que hayamos tenido y que se encuentren grabados.
Gracias. Bueno, una feliz noche. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a todos. Hasta luego.
Gracias a todos. Saludos.
Buenas noches.